I need some traction. You need some traction.
Hey everyone, Lloyd Lobo here, co-founder at Boast AI. We're on a mission to help innovative companies become successful by getting them access to government funding and resources. Today's Traction webinar is brought to you by Boast AI, Launch Academy in partnership with Founder Institute, Growth Blazers, Lazarides Institute, and BCF Ventures. We're going to keep it super informal here. Max is an old friend. I'm an investor in Max's GTM Fund. I'm moving to a city. He moved from the Bay Area or New York or wherever to Austin. We've known each other for a very long time, come up in the same circle. So I'm going to keep it really informal. What Max has done really well though is he's mastered the art of hustle, right? He's the founder of SalesHacker, the largest community for salespeople, for growth-minded salespeople. Then he started a fund, GTM Fund, recently, and the who's who of Silicon Valley tech is an LP in his fund. And Max has had the good fortune of investing in companies very early, like Outreach, what else? Drift, Gong. Was it Gong? No, not
yeah, early advisor in Gong, Carbon Health. I was an early employee at Udemy, so seeing him early, picking some
Carbon Health. Carbon Health.
That's a good one. I'm high at this spot. I told somebody the other day, I think that's going to be the most valuable one out of all of them. Just completely fixing healthcare. So, and Aaron Bali is, I think the world of that guy. I mean, he's like, he's so brilliant, but he's got a good balance of the EQ and IQ there, and he's doing a fantastic job. Worked for him at Udemy for a little while. So, yeah, excited on that one. Excited to be here with you. Talk about hustle. Who hustles more than you? Look at how many things you got your hand in. And then how many you moving to at one time? I can't even keep track of you.
I'm learning from the best, man. Like you've been a great friend, supporter, and just overall, just by a function of being badass, when you become the sum of 5-6 people you respect a lot and follow, right? And that's what I got. I got a bunch of badasses like you in my network. But one thing you've done really awesomely, and I think people have ignored this until this year. This year, sort of like the building a media company on the front end of your business, community-led growth. It's becoming a boardroom conversation. But I think you and I were doing this before that was even cool, right? Like, yeah. So let's talk about this, because companies like Amex, Adobe. I mean, Amex has the open forum. Adobe is CMO.com. HubSpot's inbound, and then Outreach acquired SalesHacker, so they don't build it; they acquire it.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing it happen all. You see, the Hustle was acquired by HubSpot. You see, what was it?
Hustle was acquired by HubSpot.
Yeah, you didn't see that.
Sam's.
Yeah. I think
when did that happen?
It was like 27 million. 2-3 months ago or something like that.
Wow. Because I have Dharmesh hopping on our Traction webinars every once in a while. Yeah. And he messaged me saying he's a big fan.
You got to ask about that. Yeah, that happened. And then MakerPads and Zapier, and then Indie Hackers and Stripe. So, it's happening. CMX and Bevy. Yeah. I think it's a smart move. It's easier to build and buy in a lot of ways. And I think, being internal here at Outreach, we've 9x in valuation since the acquisition. When SalesHacker was acquired by Outreach, right when we had started talking, Outreach raised at a $515 million valuation. We sit here today having recently raised at a $4.4 billion valuation, grown quite a bit since that valuation. But yeah, sitting here at a 9x in 3 years, especially when you're starting at $500 million already, 9x is pretty damn good. So yeah, I mean, we've been able to show that SalesHacker and buying a media company and building that kind of community is a real huge differentiator. And I think like at that time, when Outreach made that acquisition, there was a company called Inside Sales that had raised, $200+ million at a $1.2 billion valuation. They just had a fire sale to some patent troll company. So
Inside Sales just got
yeah, they changed their name to Zant, and then yeah, I think that they're kind of done with over there. Then there's SalesLoft and some other vendors in our space that were kind of had raised similar amounts of money, and I think we've shot past a lot of them. So I definitely think SalesHacker was a big part of it. Definitely not all of it, not even close, but a big part of it.
So I have this thesis, and I say this since we started Boast, because when we started Traction, it was pizza nights. We used to do pizza nights every week, and every time more and more people would come, those pizza nights turned into a conference, turned into traction. Now it's like 110,000 subscriber community. I tell the team all the time, you can't track one-to-one attribution, but if you fall in love with your customer and make them successful beyond your product or service, you'll build a community. And if you build a community, you won't become a commodity. It's a great way to differentiate in a fragmented market, which you talked about, like everyone from SalesLoft to there's a whole bunch of tools, right? I can't even think of, but nothing sticks here. Outreach sticks, right? Because you guys built a good product, but then you attach that power of the community. So Max, walk us through your backstory, man. Like, how did you decide to build this SalesHacker? Like, what led to it? And then why did you sell it? I mean, it was good for you and great for outreach, but yeah, walk us through your backstory.
Yeah, so I was the eighth employee at Udemy, second business hire, and was focusing on the sales side of the marketplace back in 2011. We raised a seed round of funding, needed to figure out how to grow and grow fast. So we built some really hacky stuff on the sales side of that business. We had virtual assistants in the Philippines that acted as our sales reps, our sales development reps. We were using an early sales engagement platform that no longer exists called ToutApp to send out emails at scale, and like basically automated or kind of like hacked our own follow-up sequences that you couldn't do at the time through our virtual assistants in the Philippines. What else? We were scraping websites. So, we wanted to create courses for Udemy. So the best way to do that was to go out and scrape things like Amazon and places where people wrote books, find experts, and then follow down that kind of rabbit hole where you'd find somebody's book on Ruby on Rails. You want them to teach a course. So you go to their Amazon page for their book, put their name in Google, find their website, go to their website, find their contact info, take their contact info, put it into your process to start, the sales process, whether it's phone calls or emails. We kind of automated that whole thing using Python and a bunch of external web scrapers, Mechanical Turk, things like that. Our founders were getting questions about how we were growing so fast. Investors and other founders would come to me, and other heads of growth and heads of sales would come to me, and we'd talk about some of the hacky stuff we were doing. So kind of started as a couple blog posts here and there, a small little niche meetup that we had, turned into a full-fledged conference in 2013 after I left Udemy. Ran our first conference, had 300 people, made some good money on the conference, and realized, wow, there's a business here. And, worst case scenario, I do this for a year, build my brand, and then potentially go be a VP of sales somewhere, or start my own tech company or something like that. Kind of kept spiraling from there. The conferences turned into meetups, which turned into an online publication with webinars and over 170,000 subscribers and 300,000 unique visitors. And I picked up the SaaSter Annual, which is where I met you. We ran the SaaSter Annual for Jason Lemkin for the first 2 years. He was a speaker at our first conference. He really kind of grokked the whole SalesHacker movement.
I'm wearing the SaaSter t-shirt.
There you go. You're really bought into this. I love it. So yeah, just kind of built the network over time, and through that built a brand for myself. Gave me some opportunities to do some early investments and some advisories all along the way, and took every advantage of those. I mean, I remember doing some sponsorships where they were like, "Oh, can we get a discount in exchange? We'll give you some equity as an advisor in the company." Great. That's turned into a lot of money since then, way more than what we've left on the table doing that deal. So when we had the opportunity to do things like that, if we really liked the company and knew we, in some cases knew we probably weren't going to get the full amount anyway, we opted into things like that. And here we are 5, 6, 7 years later, and some of those things are starting to really come to fruition. And Gong at a $7.5 billion valuation, is a great example of one of those companies where I was able to get in as an advisor through the Series A, through the brand that I was building through SalesHacker. So ran that for 5 years. Did my investment in outreach in very early 2015.
It was called something else. Was it the HR company, HR software company at the time?
It was Group Talent, recruiting software. They pivoted to outreach sales software and then went out to raise their seed. So I was in post pivot, but right after they pivoted, and helped them raise their seed round. Actually, they did their seed from the same investors as the investors in Udemy, MHS Capital. So that's a couple winners for a small fund right there. And then, in 2018, went to Outreach's Unleash conference, sat down with Manny, said, "Hey, Manny, congrats on the $500 million valuation, $65 million Series D. What keeps you up at night?" And he said, "Marketing." I said, "Oh, well, I have a media company with 170,000 subscribers," or whatever the number was, focused on B2B salespeople, and you've got best in class sales software. Let's make this thing happen. Took us, I think, 3 months to go from that conversation to me starting at Outreach and SalesHacker being acquired by Outreach. And it's been almost exactly 3 years from the date of that acquisition. We've still left SalesHacker alone, in the sense that, it's not everything Outreach sponsored, everything Outreach promoting, not even close. It's very much kind of unbiased and on its own. And, there are definitely, the SalesHacker team has been integral in helping Outreach with a lot of things along the way. But we launched the SalesHacker community on SalesHacker last May. We really advanced it, and SalesHacker still runs at break even. So we're kind of like allowed to kill what we eat on the SalesHacker side of the house. And my day-to-day in SalesHacker is a lot less than it was for the past 3 years, but the team there is doing a fantastic job. And I think it's been a great success since.
That's amazing. And it's interesting how things work out, right? HubSpot got it in the early days, right? And when we did traction, we modeled it on that. HubSpot, in the late 2000s, I was an engineer. Everything I learned about digital marketing as a function of working in a startup, it's like, how do I know, study SEO or learn anything? There wasn't much content. And they created the community inbound, right? It was around educating the audience community. Gainsight did the same thing. They created a category by educating people around what customer success is. And our mission is at Boast is to help innovative companies become successful. They need more than funding, so the resources. And that's what we started with, the community, and we kept the name separate. We never thought of it. The only thought there was, don't bastardize the community by trying to hawk your product. Create a community where people can come together and learn. And it's paid in like 100x the effort, right? Like, our investors came from there, some of our biggest customers and whatnot. The value is huge. So I'm not surprised that Outreach saw the value and keeping it separate, because they don't want to be seen as people who are hawking the product. It builds a true community. And that's a key differentiator, right? I think SalesHacker will be to Outreach what inbound became for HubSpot. Would you say that, right?
I mean, that's definitely the goal. I think Outreach already had a lot of really great things going for it on the community side as well. So we wanted to keep those and preserve those. We're building a new category, and SalesHacker's job is to get out in front of Outreach. So if we can evangelize that people need to leverage sales technology, that people need to usher in a generation of modern selling. If people need to learn about conversational intelligence, revenue intelligence, sales engagement, things like that. If we can get that in more people's brains and educate them, it's good. Rising tide lifts all boats. It's good for us. It's good for our competitors. It's good for other categories that we don't participate in. And that's fine. As long as more companies modernize their sales processes and their sales orgs, we're happy. And we're happy to pay the bill for that.
You can't be a category leader if the category only has one. But if multiple people buy into your mission, then you create a movement. And as a creator of that movement, you own the space. Gainsight, maybe when it started, HubSpot with inbound. There's so many examples of that, right? Yeah. Awesome. So, perhaps walk us through, everyone's thinking about this in 2021. When they should have been thinking about it years ago. But where should people start? Like, you are a SaaS company. What's the first step you take? Like, how do you go about this methodically?
About what?
About not acquiring, but like building this massive media company on the front end of your SaaS, because it takes a lot of effort, right? The good thing is, like, traction for us, for example, pays itself. It doesn't even figure on the balance sheet, because the events, sponsorships, everything, it's like neutral, right? Cost neutral. It runs itself.
Yeah.
Like you
Same
said,
with
sales
that.
hacker.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think if you're doing it from scratch at a company, it's okay if it's a loss leader for a little while. And companies think about things differently. Like I remember we started phasing out our in-person events and our conferences because there was so much funding going into all these tech companies that they could now run conferences as a loss leader, and previously they couldn't. And so they were getting into conferences earlier. So you'd go into March and you'd talk to a speaker or sponsor, and they'd be like, yeah, I mean, I could do your conference, but then there's these 4 other vendor conferences and this one other conference that's also in the industry that's like, a research and advisory conference. And, those companies had other products that they can sell. And so their events were loss leaders. So they could have sushi for lunch. And then, the coach of the Chicago Bulls, Phil Jackson as the keynote speaker, and then Nelly for the after party, and lose $500,000 on their event. And we couldn't. We had to make money on our event because we didn't have that upsell or anything like that. So I think when you run these things as part of a SaaS company, it allows you to do things that you couldn't normally do separately. And I think it makes a ton of sense to have the media brand on the front of your SaaS company. Now, we run at break even and still do some pretty amazing things. So I would start it as, whether it's a customer advisory board or a small customer group or something like that, but you can do it on Slack. You could do it, using one of these community management tools. There's so many of, I think Mighty Networks is one of them. There's so many of them out there right now, but just get started and start it with a high quality group of really happy customers, and just stay there with 10 or 20 or, somewhere around that number group of customers where they just feel like they're getting a ton of value, and just stay in that range for the first 3 or 6 months. Just provide a ton of value, learn things. Those 10, 20, 25 people are going to be very forgiving on the things that you're learning as you build that community. And then once you feel like you understand, what the community needs and how you can provide the most value to them, and what value that, they want from you, then you can start to grow it outside of those numbers. I think when you grow it too big, too fast, and you don't really know what levers to pull, and, if the platform is right, then you end up in a crappy place where you end up in like no man's land, where you got a bunch of people in this thing. It's not really people really aren't engaging with each other, and you don't know what metrics to track because you never did it at a smaller scale, and now it's too big and things are all over the place. Like I remember when we launched the new SalesHacker community, we built it from scratch. We made a conscious decision to own the platform. I think there are some things you got to factor in when you do it. You can do it for network effect and build it on Slack or LinkedIn or Facebook where your people live, or you can do it for moderation purposes on a platform that's actually built for communities. But the last thing to think about is ownership. Do you want to own the destiny for your community, or are you at the whim of a company that could get acquired, or a company that's not built for groups and can reconfigure their product at any time and kind of screw your group over? And we had that issue. We had a thriving 12,000 person group on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn replatformed in 2015, 2016, and they killed groups essentially. And groups was the last thing to get rebuilt. So we had this 12,000 person community that had great moderation. And all of a sudden our moderation features went away. We couldn't moderate anymore. We couldn't manage our community.
The engagement dies, right? One of the things I learned with this is, community, media company, whatever you call it, the cadence is very, very important. If you lose cadence, people, out of sight, out of mind, right? So what did you do when LinkedIn killed that?
We spoke to their product people for 2 years, and we were getting promised things, and it never came to fruition. So eventually, after the acquisition, we rebuilt our community on SalesHacker.com because we didn't ever want to get burned again by another vendor who we were at the whim of. I mean, they could do whatever they want. So now when you go to SalesHacker, you'll see the community front and center, and we've got user generated content. We went for more of a Reddit style community. Yeah. Versus, there's so many different types of communities. Like Influitive is a incentivized community. Then you have Salesforce communities and others like that are, or even regular Slack communities that are more one-to-one aspect. Like you can message individual people, start separate threads. inside of a larger community, but archiving is hard. We wanted to make sure archiving was easy and built kind of a more of a living, breathing sales encyclopedia with user-generated content, more of a Reddit style.
Definitely. And I think in true sales hacker style, you start with the ICP. Like it's like building a product, right? You start with the ideal customer profile, figure out sort of where they eat, breathe, drink, sleep, what are the pains they're looking to solve. Then you start with something very small, bringing people together and make sure they're happy and they're consistently engaging. And then you do more and more and more. There's a whole bunch of other products that's come up like tribe.so, circle.so, which helps you build communities. Oftentimes when people ask me, they jump right to the tool. Oh, I want to build a community. My board members say I want to build a community. Should I create a Slack group? Should I create a Facebook group? Or should I subscribe to like Tribe or something? Whereas, what you're saying is, say, start with the ideal customer, figure out their pain points and how you can help them become successful in that role, and start small events kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm a fan of, I'm a fan of starting where people live and then putting them onto a community later. I mean, there's nothing wrong with making it in Slack and then deciding, okay, we're at critical mass here with the capabilities that we get with Slack. Let's move it over to a community platform. Sorry, I gotta let my dogs out. Scratching at the door. There you go. So yeah, I think you can get away with that. For me, it's just about the metrics that you're tracking. It's funny, when we launched the new SalesHacker community, we were tracking threads and comments and engagement. And you start tracking it and you realize you need to kind of rejigger the metrics a little bit because you're not exactly tracking the right thing. So for example, if you have 50 comments that day, that could be good. It's up from 30 the day before. But if you have one thread that has all those comments, and then you have 8 other threads that have 0, then the 8 people who posted those threads are getting no value out of your platform. And the one person who posted and the people who engage in that post are getting all the value. So you kind of need to understand, like, okay, you're not looking at how many comments or threads or what the engagement number is that day. You're not even looking at the average daily. You're looking at the median per thread. So you're trying to understand, like, I'd rather have 10 threads that all have 5 comments on each of them, maybe, than one thread that has a ton and the other 8 or 9 that have nothing. Because then the person who asked the first one is getting all the value, and who knows, like, what if that thread only has 2 or 3 other people chiming in? So those are the other things you need to start looking out for, is like, all right, how do we foster more engagement in the community? So you start to really go through these kind of exercises as you understand your community, like, what are the right metrics we need to be tracking? And then once we can track those things, what are the activities or incentives or whatever we need to provide to get these people involved? And how do you layer on, like, your newsletter or your digest to the actions? I mean, it's just a whole kind of user behavior type thing, and that's when it gets a lot deeper. I think if you start with the 10 or 20 people that are really engaged and you just automatically get going, then when you layer people into that, the conversations will continue. So I think it's really hard to start big, like we did on the SalesHacker community launch. And then a lot of the other smaller communities that I've worked with in the past, or I've done in the past, starting small and starting really high quality and people who are super engaged is the right way to go. There was no way for us to do that on a Reddit style post, but we actually had 100 people from our SalesHacker community in Slack for a month before we launched the SalesHacker community publicly. And those 100 people gave us feedback on iterations of the SalesHacker community that was about to be posted, but they were also getting to know each other, getting to engage, et cetera, et cetera. So when we posted, they were in that Slack, and we kept that Slack open. We said, hey, we need somebody on this post. We need somebody on this post. Like, hey, this is a really good thread. You 3 that are in RevOps, like, do you have anything to say about this? And you kind of fostered that community over time until now it's at like 15,000 people and it's going. Now it's like hamster wheel. but you had to, you had to do it the right way. Colin Campbell and our team at SalesHacker did a fantastic job on getting that up and running.
But again, it started with the people, the pain point, then sort of a small group feedback, then you picked the right channel. But in many ways, did you start with events first, or did you start with content first? Because I want to dive into content. You're creating great content here, right? And that's a big part of becoming this media company. In fact, anything sales that I want to learn, I actually go to SalesHacker. I tell my team, go to SalesHacker. Like if I want to learn about anything related to sales, whatever it is, the nitty gritty is on there, right? Walk us through the content strategy. How did you come up with that, and how should people define that strategy? Because there's a few things in there, like writing the right content, and then there's also the cadence, and then there's a lot of sort of very high level content that everyone in sales, everyone that has a sales company right now, posts like meaningless content, I find, right? Like they just feel like they want to jump on them. But you guys' content is deep, and I can learn and whatnot. So how should people think about content strategy?
Yeah, so starting the way we started and starting the right way are two different things. And then doing it the way we do it now and doing it the way you should when you start are two different things. I mean, right now we're very big, so the way we do it is probably very different than what you should do if you start. The way I started it, SalesHacker, was I just started writing on the stuff that I thought was interesting. Then I started bringing in guest authors who had things to share that I also thought was interesting. So, people who spoke at my events or people who came to the meetups that raised their hand and wanted to share something. We essentially built a pedestal, a soapbox for them to get on. And then we brought the audience, and you kind of level up over time. Like the audience gets bigger, so you get bigger names to speak or write. And then the audience grows based on their brands, and then you get bigger people. So, when we were starting out, I was so lucky to get Jason Lemkin and Doug Landis and some of these guys who were, proven, Ralph Barcy, proven sales and CEOs and whatever leaders to come and write for us and create content for us. And then, we launched the podcast, and we had all this viewership, and the podcast came out. We had, probably the top sales podcast out there. And then, okay, I can go out to Dan Pink or Andy Duke or Chris Voss and get them to speak on it because we had this big audience. So big audience got us bigger names. Then Dan Pink gets on there. I mean, incredible author of many sales books. Andy Duke, Chris Voss. I mean, some of the best authors that, not necessarily writing on sales, but negotiation or thinking strategically, things like that. Their brands build the audience, and now, it kind of toggles up. So I think the right way to start is, especially for a SaaS company, is understand what your keywords are. So using like Ahrefs or SEMrush or whatnot to understand what your keywords are in your category, in your industry, what you're gunning for. And then you need to start writing content around those. And there's a couple of different types of content. There's like SEO pillar content, like for us might be, what is sales operations? What is sales engagement? We want to rank high on the page when somebody types in sales operations or sales, engagement or sales enablement. But then there's also like killer content, which is, how are we going to put together a formula for modern sales operations, for how we do things at outreach. And, obviously we're a shining example of how things are done because we get to see 5,000 plus orgs do this and take all the best stuff from all of them and then come back to them and teach them the best stuff. So, we want to put together that killer content. That's what's going to really bring, our audience in, coming back, give us that credibility. But then you want to also optimize for organic traffic and also being, the go-to for everything for your category. So really understanding what your keywords are, optimizing for those keywords, and then having a really great balance between the pillar content, which is long form, numbered content type stuff, SEO content, and then the killer stuff, which is, wow, this is groundbreaking, super helpful to me. Oh my God. This is like super 301 level versus the 101 level other stuff.
Definitely. And I like how you put it, the pillar content and the killer content, because the killer stuff is, you're new in sales, you're new sales leader, or just you in general, you want to know how you're benchmarking against others. And you guys have a great number of companies you deal with, as long as it's adding value where it's tactical implementation, what people can do in their business versus really, really high level. That's what separates you guys, right? The Sales Hacker. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
Pillar content, pillar content. I just came up with that on this. That TM.
I know you came up with it on the call.
On the spot. It probably exists. I bet you I've seen it somewhere and like regurgitated. I don't know, but I'm sure it exists, but I don't know where I pull it out of.
Awesome. So you talk a lot about hacking culture. Is that still a thing? What does hacking culture mean?
I don't know if it's as much of a thing as it was when we started. I mean, when I started SalesHacker, growth hacking was like all the rage, and everybody was like, oh, we know how to hack Facebook ads and hack PR and all this other kind of stuff. And Growth Hacker Conference was out, and there was growthhackers.com, Sean Ellis, and there was Traction by Justin Mayers, and a lot of that stuff's super valuable, and it's still super valuable. But I think things have probably gotten easier, or maybe the knowledge has just been shared and kind of everybody knows these things now. They're not like cutting edge ways to do things, is probably more accurate. But when we started SalesHacker, we just wanted to find a way to generate more revenue using less resources. We were a seed stage startup. We had to grow or die, and we needed to figure out how to grow very fast. We didn't have a lot of money to do it. I had to hire my SDRs, were virtual assistants in the Philippines making $4 an hour. I couldn't go hire $65,000 a year SDRs here. So like we had to figure out ways to automate things. And that's why we called it SalesHacker. That's why we called it my first book was Hacking Sales. I think the term hacking, that kind of stuff, also for people who've been in the industry for a very long time, was like, oh, like you're doing something dark or illegal or whatever. It's like, no, we're just trying to generate more revenue using less resources. We got to hack this process. We got to get creative here. We don't have the fat that big companies do to just throw cash at things. And, I think there was a movement in the term hacker also amongst startup people and early stage, tech people and sales technology people, because they banded behind that notion of, we're all in this together. Like we're all learning together. We're all trying to figure this thing out. And we're not just taking like these cushy, comfortable jobs at massive companies that have all the, bells and whistles and enterprise sales cycles and whatever else. It's like, no, we don't have long deal cycles. We're not gonna be around in 12 months. We can't have a 12-month sales cycle. Like if we don't close deals now, we're done. So I think there was like a movement behind that. I think, that's one of the key things of community is like, how do you build in that movement? Like, what's the antagonist protagonist relationship? How do you find a villain in things and then, move everybody in that direction against those things? And sometimes it's like old school sales tactics. One of our things was like, how do we make sales less taboo? The words, oh, that's too salesy. Oh, like everybody thought sales, used car salesman. Now you see people in like 2015, 2016, when SaaS started getting a ton of funding, you started to see the investment banker crowd that was graduating and going to be an analyst at Goldman Sachs. They started to go to take AE jobs at SaaS companies because they realized they can make the same amount of money, if not more, for the next few years at a SaaS company and not have to work 120 hours a week. And that they'd be really good at it too, because they worked hard. They came from good schools. And, that's fantastic. Good. Glad they're coming into the industry. Sales is becoming less taboo. And, what I love about sales is it's the ultimate even playing field. You can come from an Ivy League school or you can not go to school at all. Your upside is how hard you work. So I thought like we did a good job of creating a movement around this like passionate plea of, anybody could be in sales, but also around the fact that like, yeah, we've got a hard job. We're trying to figure it out. We're all in it together. Sales is changing. This isn't the old school, crummy sales tactics anymore. Let's highlight and showcase the things that are working.
So we went through this, right? Defining the ICP, figuring out the pain points, your killer content, your pillar content, and really adding value so people can become successful in the roles, right, that they're doing beyond just something that's very periphery or high level. And then sort of you create a community or form for them to engage, whether it's on your website or a third-party channel like Slack or whatever, as long as there's cadence through either engagement or events, whatever have you. But then there's this one step that I think you guys did phenomenally. Once you created this community, you had a lot of brand evangelists. How did you do that? What's your advice there?
Well, we created that soapbox and put them on a pedestal. So we were able to give them an audience and some really awesome, big name folks in the industry, an audience where they could grow their brands, grow their names, get advisories, get access to investments, get access to the next big job when they come and spoke at SalesHacker. And we created that credibility by working with awesome companies as our sponsors and by getting more and more people to show up to our events. And it's funny, it's almost like a little marketplace that you end up creating where it's like you get good name speakers, the attendees come, sponsors want in, more sponsors want in. Yeah, that grows bigger name attendees, that grows the audience, bigger name sponsors want in. It ladders up over time. And for us, we were growing a media company outside of a SaaS company. So the sponsors mattered. It mattered a lot. And then I remember one event, I think it was our third San Francisco event. We were talking to Salesforce, but they were like, yeah, you guys are like not a tier 1 event. We're not going to do your conference. And I was like, I'll give you a free booth, like the biggest one. You'll be in the middle of everything. And like we have 50 other sales tech sponsors. All you got to do is like bring your A game and manage it and like pay for like the actual like retrofitting of the booth or whatever. We'll give you the space. And they were like, okay, we'll try it out. And then that unlocks like a whole tier of sponsors and speakers and attendees. Cause like, whoa, like Salesforce is going to be there. Okay. Salesforce thinks this is like a worthy event. And then like the next event, we ended up teaming up with them and doing a joint event. So they liked it so much from their free trial that they went much bigger with us. And like that unlocks a whole other set of audiences, right? And whether those people come to the conference or not, they now know what SalesHacker is. They come to our content, they come to other things. So we took a big bet on that. It cost us some money to let them in there and do that. And we could have, also got them hooked on like, oh, well, we're not going to do stuff unless it's free, blah, blah, blah. But ended up working out for us in the long term. But yeah, you really need to focus on that kind of ladder up and always be reaching for the bigger name folks. And same thing we did with Dan Pink and Annie Duke and Chris Voss on our podcast. Because we're able to get those names, then I can go reach out to a CRO from like Ashley Greck, CRO of Square, who's an LP in the fund, but she's been on our podcast. But, if I reach out to her and say, hey, we've got a ton of downloads, it's one thing. If I reach out to her and say, hey, we got a ton of downloads and best-selling author Dan Pink, Chris Voss, and Annie Duke have all been on the show, and your other CRO friends, X, Y, and Z, then it's like, whoa, okay, this is super credible. I've never heard of it before, but like, I'm going to do this. And we're able to get those types of people now. I mean, we just had like the EVP of sales for Xerox on. That's a huge brand, more of an old school brand. But, when you send that email and he sees those folks, like even if you've never heard of SalesHacker before, he's like, wow, well, if all these people are buying into it, it must be a good show. So you kind of just ladder it up over time and, try and run that hamster wheel as fast as possible.
My favorite term is brand rub. It's funny, we probably were doing this at the same time, but not like discussing with each other. And we did a lot of the similar things, like with Traction. We started with a small group of people, customers, adding more value. Every meetup we did, more and more people started coming. It went into a conference, cold email, used Mechanical Turk, Amazon's Mechanical Turk, to scrape all the people, because I couldn't afford using even Zoom Info to get people's emails. And then cold emailed everyone, and we had VMware and Red Hat and all these people show up, then sponsors show up, and everything was brand rub, like attach yourself to a bigger brand. So you sort of suck their superpowers, and then the next time it's all laddering up, right? So this works. I mean, it clearly worked for SalesHacker. It's clearly worked for Boast. We've secured 123 million in funding as a result, and we're doing well. So I think ultimately starting with your customer and making them successful is key, and then providing the content and doing it very consistently is something that many people can do, but I think doing it well is the key, right? There are many times where I wanted to throw in the towel because the events don't make money, this, right? Like it's hard selling sponsorships when you have a software company. How did you keep moving? I think that is the key thing. How do you keep moving? Because a lot of people, they say we'll do something and then they stop. They write like 4 blog posts and stop, or they do 3 meetups and they stop. How did you keep motivated?
Well, consistency is the key to anything. So you have to really like what you do. I think that's first of all. I got a taste of some good money from it in my first couple events. And like I said, I saw the writing on the wall when events started getting cannibalized by everybody else raising money. And then we pivoted to digital, and digital ended up working really well for us. So, I don't know the formula would have been the same for how we started. I mean, I know for a fact, actually, it wouldn't have been the same. Like we wouldn't start an events business right now, especially, I mean, like we got COVID out there, but especially not with that. I think, you got to find the gap in the marketplace and then exploit that. And so we did. When we started SalesHacker, I say we in the royal sense. I started SalesHacker on my own back in 2013. I remember the first event. I looked around. I was like, okay, there's Sales 3.0 and AISP are the only other 2 sales conferences that exist. Both of them have been around for over a decade. Nobody's focusing on early stage sales technology. There's a huge gap here. I can fill this. I know this stuff. And that was my way in. Over time, that gap closed and we weren't the best way to fill it. So we had to pivot to other things. When I sold the company to Outreach, we were doing most of our money and most of our revenue through digital events. The margin on those were so much better. We can kind of do an unlimited amount of them. And even to this day, we still do, almost all of our revenue comes from digital. So we pivoted the business from an events company to a digital company over the course of that amount of time. And had we stayed just SalesHacker, I'm sure we probably would have done paid communities and online courses and other things like that. I think we were a little too early to that trend, which is now huge, like On Deck, Pavilion, which was revenue collected before, all the ones. Yeah.
You're an investor in Revenue Collective, right?
I'm an investor in On Deck. GTM Fund's an investor in Revenue Collective. I'm in Maven, obviously Udemy. So I'm a big believer in online education, online community.
Yeah, me too. I say it all the time. If you build a community, you won't become a commodity. But this is fantastic, right? We switched. So Traction, we used to do one big conference and meetups in different cities every other month, like dinners. Last year, April, we switched to digital. All I did was ask every single speaker. I knew because when Jason Lemkin wasn't doing SaaStr in February, and my wife's a physician, so I knew that the live event's not happening. Reached out to all the speakers. I kid you not, we do 2 webinars a week. Our lineup is full through next February.
Yeah.
And we added 50,000 subscribers in that time, right? So
I hope you use that knowledge of your wife being a physician, everything, to like buy a bunch of Zoom stock and things like that also, instead of just lining up a bunch of speakers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my wife bought Zoom and Twilio in the 30s.
There you go.
So she runs a community and a podcast called Stocks for Docs. She knew she was married to an entrepreneur, so I'm going to render her broke. So she started learning about value investing and has a stocks for. If you want to learn about stocksfordocs.org, if you want to learn about investing, she manages.
I'm gonna, like, next time there's a pandemic, this is like the _1 place to go. Stocks for Docs.
Awesome. Good stuff. So Max, great insight here. Start with the ideal customer profile, find a gap in the market, deliver really valuable content through digital and meetups, whatever mode, but do it very, very consistently. Make sure people are engaged, and then give people a soapbox. Give your biggest evangelists a soapbox so they can look like heroes and reward them, kind of thing. As you look back at your career, what do you wish you did more of, and what do you wish you did less of?
Oh man, I ran my business when I was in my like mid to late 20s. And I think I cared less about like building a scalable, massive company and more about having a really great work-life balance. It worked out for me because I was able to sell my company, retain massive upside, and still get to a really good place. I think I could have just as easily said, okay, I'm not going to go to Bali every December for a month. I'm not going to, go to the Hamptons every summer for 3 months. I'm not going to do all these other things that, I spent money instead of investing in my business, but I wanted to live my life in my 20s. You don't get it back. Part of me is like, oh, I wish I'd gone bigger. Part of me is like, I enjoyed a really amazing time of my life I would never get back. And I think, to kind of quote the Annie Duke book, Thinking in Bets, you can't base the decision, you're not right or wrong based on the outcome. And for me, in this case, the outcome makes me feel right. Thinking in Bets, yeah, exactly. The outcome makes me feel right, but I don't know what the answer is. We probably could have gone a lot bigger had I reinvested a lot in the business, but I was a young kid and we didn't do that. So I don't know if that is a less of something or a more of something answer, but it's some transparency into my thinking in running my business as a 25 to 30-year-old who, started, we had millions in revenue and our margins were great. And there were times where I didn't reinvest that. I said, I'm going to live my life. And I know that's not like the tech startup way of doing things. A lot of people raise money.
I'm glad you did that, man. I've been a part of 4 venture-backed failures, and you saw Speakeasy, raised from Salesforce and everything else. We failed. When we bootstrapped Boast, and when we were closing the Series A in December, my wife told me, like, if this fails right now, you're going to get a job at Salesforce or Oracle. Because she's like, you can't do this all or nothing zero-sum game. So make sure you de-risk a little, bring the right investors. And she's like, you can't keep doing this. You're getting old, and like, I can't keep running the family, which was a good wake-up call, right? So I'm glad you did those things. A lot of people, they think that they're going to keep investing in their companies and with their time and money, and time is money eventually. Their personal lives become a collateral damage, right? When you're in your 60s, then you start thinking, or late 50s, like my dad, oh, I wish I did these things when I was younger, right? And I'm proud of you, and I'm glad to call you a friend that you didn't make those compromises, and it's important. And I'm starting to realize the same too, and actually not making those compromises anymore. Ultimately, why do people do this? Yes, you want to change the world and build something big, but if founders don't think about themselves, then nobody else will.
Yeah, I mean, again, outcome, I was right to do it. I enjoyed my 20s, and I'm going to see the upside. But I don't know if you can say that it was right or wrong based on the outcome. I think it's, situation dependent. Could have just as easily, I don't know, squandered it.
Yeah, definitely. What's next for you and GTM Fund? You're investing in lots of great companies. I love what you guys do. I love that even with GTM Fund, you've sort of built this community, right? Like on Slack, we all engage with each other, all the LPs and the portfolio companies. You brought that flavor of SalesHacker.
Everything's community, everything is media. It's just how you leverage it, I guess. So we built the GTM Fund, 120 plus LPs, all GTM leaders, VPC level sales, marketing, customer success leaders from companies where they've been there, done that. Snowflake, DocuSign, Zendesk, Salesforce, you name it. Some of the fastest growing SaaS companies of all time. And we're deploying. We raised $4 million this year, deploying that into probably 50 or so companies that we'll invest in. But the value prop's really resonating. We've got people who've built a lot of different areas of sales, marketing, customer success. And there are a lot of companies that are raising money right now who know nothing about that. And it's funny, like 80% of the investments we see are probably product founders and 20% folks that have come from a GTM role. The 80% know that they need GTM Fund because they don't know anything about GTM. The 20% who come from GTM roles get it even better because they know how hard GTM is. So it's been resonating with, the companies really nicely. And we've been able to get in on some tier 1 deals with some tier 1 VCs and some really awesome deals so far. And it's cool. So we'll go out and do a bigger fund next year, and we'll put a lot more muscle behind it as things go on. I'm still at Outreach doing this on the side. So, we're prioritizing where we can. We know it could be amazing if we could put the right muscle in the right places. So we're choosing to hire instead of cycle off Outreach. And I think there's so much upside at Outreach still that it'd be silly to leave. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been a blast. It's been a nice little change of pace, and it's also been accretive to Outreach. LPs are buying Outreach, portfolio companies are buying Outreach. We're building really good relationships with other funds, with other potential LPs. So it's been really accretive there as well.
Definitely, right? I see this overall happen with us at Traction too. People are more customers are meeting more, getting more advice, meeting investors, all of that. The community, the value of it, you become the energy that you put out, right? And if it's positive and it's adding value to others, you'll get the value too. What are your top two books outside of your book? So you wrote Hacking Sales, and you wrote another one, right? What was it called?
Well, I wrote
3 books. So Sales Engagement.
Sales Engagement, Hacking Sales, and Career Hacking. Hacking Sales and Sales Engagement both published by Wiley. Career Hacking is self-published. I don't want to sell that to a publisher. It's my little, I'm going to do a volume 2 of it after my life at Outreach, but just kind of all my mantras, whatnot, for how I got to where I got in my life leading up to the Outreach acquisition. So those 3 books. Let's see, what else is top of my list? The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino is something I carried around in my backpack when I worked at Udemy for a very long time. A lot about sales, also about life. The 4 Agreements over here, Don Miguel Ruiz. These are a couple that are on my bookshelf, but yeah, the Warren Buffett, his autobiography, The Snowball, was a good one.
And the Greatest Salesman, you said?
The Greatest Salesman in the World.
In the world. Awesome. I typed a whole bunch of books here. This is awesome. Where can we find you, and where are you most active, on LinkedIn or Twitter?
LinkedIn is my jam.
Awesome. So follow Max on LinkedIn, Max Altschuler. Awesome, man. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully I will see you in Austin.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm pumped. 10-10.
Love and peace. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing some great insights. Have a great one.